But before we get further into today's video, we want to bring you a word from our amazing sponsor, Scentbird. For years, I wore the same cologne. It was an understated fragrance with hints of citrus and vanilla. But ever since I started using Scentbird, I've been exploring new colognes. I realized I don't really like bold scents or ones that smell like aftershave. They remind me of cheap bottles that you find at a gas station. I really like subtle, natural, and clean-smelling colognes. Since I've been using Scentbird, I've found a bunch of colognes that I really like. Scentbird is a fantastic way to shop for new colognes and perfumes. For $17, they'll send you a 30-day sample so you can test out your new fragrance. If you like it, you can purchase a full bottle. Also, you get to choose the fragrance, so there are no surprises. But personally, I like exploring and finding new fragrances. You can do this by taking their quiz, and they'll suggest some fragrances for you. Scentbird has a ton of brand name fragrances like Prada, Gucci, Versace, and niche brands like Skylar, Heretic, and Confessions of a Rebel. Make sure you use my coupon code CRIMINAL55 for 55% off at Scentbird. That's just a little over $7 for your first month. It's available in the United States and Canada. This month, I got Book by Commodity, Bentley Silver Lake, and Sage Supreme by Maison 21G. I immediately thought that Book would be my favorite because I'm a bookworm and I love the smell of books and libraries. But it turned out that I really love Sage Supreme from Maison 21G. It's clean and sophisticated smelling. It reminds me of a high-end barbershop. So by just putting it on, I feel freshly groomed. We just want to say big thanks to Scentbird for sponsoring this video. Check out the links below. Number 3. Lacey Spears. Garnett Spears was born in Decatur, Alabama on December 3, 2008. He appeared to suffer from medical problems from the beginning of his life. He was in and out of hospitals for the first 9 weeks of his life. His mother, Lacey Spears, would bring him because he had several health problems, including digestive issues and severe ear infections. She said he couldn't keep anything down, so he wasn't gaining any weight. The doctors were mystified. They couldn't figure out why he kept vomiting, so they decided to perform surgery. They found nothing. The problems continued, and Lacey said that Garnett wouldn't drink from a bottle. So Garnett ended up in the hospital with severe dehydration. When he was 9 months old, he underwent a second surgery. During this surgery, a feeding tube known as a G-tube was inserted into his stomach. After that, Garnett started to gain some weight, but he continued to have health problems. In 2010, Lacey and her son moved in with her grandmother in Clearwater, Florida. She stayed there for about 2 years and then decided to move again. This time she moved into an alternative community called The Fellowship in Chestnut Ridge, New York. The Fellowship is a community where older people and people with disabilities live. Lacey explained Garnett's health problems to members of the community. But many of the members never saw any problems with Garnett. He seemed healthy, and they often saw him eating like the other children. But Lacey claimed he suffered from horrible stomach pains and often couldn't eat with his mouth. When Garnett was 4, Lacey took him to a pediatric gastroenterologist. He found nothing wrong with Garnett except that he still had the G-tube in his stomach. They usually aren't left in place for that long. The doctor suggested a battery of complex tests to see if anything was wrong with Garnett, and Lacey agreed. The tests revealed that nothing was wrong with Garnett. The doctor then suggested simpler tests to see if the G-tube was necessary. Lacey instantly opposed those tests. The doctor thought it was odd that she was open to the more complex tests, but she would oppose the easier ones. The doctor became suspicious and frustrated with Lacey, and he requested that she provide him with Garnett's medical records. Lacey never provided the medical records, and she stopped taking Garnett to the doctor. Lacey talked online about her son's illnesses and her quest to help him. She even started a blog about Garnett's health and her difficulties. When people asked about Garnett's father, Lacey told them it was a sheriff's deputy named Blake Robinson. She said that Robinson had died in a car accident, but Robinson was alive and well. He had met Lacey 2 or 3 times and they never had sex. Garnett's father was a man named Chris Hill. Hill and Lacey had been neighbors and they occasionally had sex. Hill thought that the baby was his, but Lacey was adamant that it wasn't. She told him to stay out of her life. As a result, he never met his son. In January 2014, 5-year-old Garnett's health took a turn for the worse. He had a fever, stomachache, and a headache. Lacey took him to a pediatrician who couldn't figure out what was wrong. Garnett's health continued to worsen. Several days after being taken to the pediatrician, he was admitted to the Nyack Hospital in Nyack, New York, because he was having seizure-like symptoms. Garnett was linked up to machines to monitor seizures, and there were cameras in the room. At first, Garnett's health improved. Lacey looked like a dutiful mother as she sat bedside. But then suddenly, there was a problem. A normal sodium level is 138. Over a few hours, Garnett's sodium level suddenly shot up to 182. The doctors were shocked because this wasn't metabolically possible. Garnett was airlifted to Westchester Medical Center in Suffern, New York. Using IVs, the doctors brought Garnett's sodium level down. But tragically, too much damage had been done. The sodium had caused his brain to swell. Garnett remained in a coma and then died on January 23, 2014. He was less than 2 months past his 5th birthday. During his short life, Garnett had been hospitalized 23 times. While Garnett was in the coma, the doctors knew what happened to him wasn't naturally possible, so they wanted a police investigation. Several detectives went to Lacey's home while he was in the coma. They found an IV bag on a pole that had a strange substance in the bag. The police asked Lacey about it, and she said she was breastfeeding, so they assumed it was breast milk in the bag. In the garbage, they found another IV bag. But the police ended up collecting either bag as evidence. On the kitchen table, they found 5 medical bottles. Behind the bottles was a can of salt. They collected the salt, some syringes, and other holistic medication. It turned out that Lacey had called a member of the fellowship and asked her to hide an IV bag. So she hid it in a closet. She told the elders, and then they turned over the IV bag. The police decided to go back to Lacey's apartment and collect the other IV bags. They sent the bag that was hidden in the closet and the one that was in the garbage for testing. There was the equivalent of 69 small salt packs in each bag. 10 weeks after Garnett's death, it was labeled a homicide. The police only had one suspect, Lacey Spears. 3 months after it was determined to be a homicide, Lacey was arrested and charged with second-degree murder and first-degree criminal manslaughter. 27-year-old Lacey Spears went to trial in February 2015. The defense argued that the hospital made a mistake, which led to Garnett's death. The prosecution argued that Lacey liked the attention she got from Garnett's illnesses, so she continued to make him sick. They said that she injected his feeding tube with a syringe and then poisoned him with salt. They used the video recording from the hospital bed as evidence. 17 times Lacey took Garnett to the washroom, which is off camera. On the day Garnett fell irreversibly ill, Lacey took Garnett to the washroom twice. After the 2 visits to the washroom, Garnett needed medical attention. In the morning, after the first trip, nurses helped him because he was feeling some discomfort. Then in the afternoon, About half an hour after going to the washroom, he started thrashing and gagging. The defense argued that the video proves that Lacey was innocent. It does not show her doing any harm to her son. Plus, each time she took Garnett to the washroom, she left the door open. Why would she poison her son with the door open? Any of the hospital staff could have walked in and saw her. The prosecution said that the video does have evidence that Lacey caused Garnett's death. They said that when you slow the video down, it looks like Lacey has a feeding tube and another substance in her hand. After a 3-week trial, the jury deliberated for 3 days. They found 27-year-old Lacey Spears guilty of second-degree murder. In April 2015, she was sentenced to 20 years to life in prison. Although Munchausen by proxy was not brought up at the trial, the judge said it was a clear case of it. He hopes that Garnett's death will bring more attention to it, and hopefully, people will report it when they see signs of it in the future. 34-year-old Lacey Spears is serving her sentence at the Bedford Hills Correctional Facility. She'll be able to apply for parole in June 2034 when she's 46 years old. Lacey maintains that she is innocent. Number 2. Laurie Recht. 40-year-old Laurie Recht gave birth to her daughter, Rebecca Recht, on May 17, 1993, in Salem, Oregon. She told people she had been artificially inseminated. According to Laurie, Rebecca was born prematurely. Supposedly, when she was born, she only weighed 2 pounds and was 13 inches long. Rebecca was then transported to a bigger hospital in Portland, Oregon. Once there, she supposedly developed a grade 3 bleed on her brain. This apparently resulted in Rebecca getting cerebral palsy. On the 4th day of Rebecca's life, Laurie said that Rebecca had open heart surgery to fix a hole in her heart. Laurie said that the medical staff didn't expect her to survive, but she pulled through. However, Rebecca had lifelong problems. Cerebral palsy made it difficult to walk, so she used a walker. At times, she would wear leg braces. Other times, she would wear hearing aids. But she didn't consistently wear the braces or the hearing aids, which some people thought was odd. Throughout her life, Rebecca was on 2 drugs. One was Concerta, a central nervous system stimulant. It's commonly prescribed to treat attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. She was also on a powerful antipsychotic called Risperdal. It's often used to treat schizophrenia in adults and aggression in people with autism. In 2007, 14-year-old Rebecca was taken out of school twice for operations. One was an eye surgery, and another was a bone straightening surgery. But when she returned to school, even though she had undergone major surgery, she didn't have any bandages. For the supposed bone straightening operation, she only had an over-the-counter splint. Laurie wasn't without her own problems. After moving to Salem, she became estranged from her sister, so she didn't talk to anyone in her family. She and Rebecca lived in state-subsidized housing in Vancouver, Washington. Laurie was constantly in need of money. She claimed she couldn't work because she had to be her daughter's full-time caretaker. Laurie also claimed that she suffered from a laundry list of health problems herself. According to the Wilmette Weekly, she told her friends she had back pain, colitis, Crohn's disease, arthritis, fibromyalgia, hemorrhoids, yeast infections, yeast-infected hemorrhoids, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorder. According to Laurie, she had some traumatic things happen in her life. Before she lived in Oregon, she lived in New York City. She claimed that while she lived there, she was raped by a doctor. She said that the doctor later shot bullets into her doorway. She told people that she was engaged to a firefighter and he died in a fire. In January 1988, she was working as a legal secretary in New York City, and she was living in Yonkers. There was a federal court order to build more low-income housing in the predominantly white neighborhoods in Yonkers. 800 people attended the meeting. The only person who spoke in favor of the affordable housing was Laurie. She was relentlessly booed and jeered for her speech. After the meeting, Laurie claimed she received death threats. The New York Times ended up doing a profile about Laurie. She claimed that people would curse her out in public. Laurie said that one time while she was shopping, a man pointed her out to his daughter and said, "You better not turn out like that." Months later, Laurie said that someone drew swastikas outside of her apartment door. Although people in Yonkers didn't like what Laurie had to say, many people were impressed with her. She was awarded an honorary Doctor of Humane Letters degree from the College of New Rochelle, and she gave a commencement speech. In the autumn of 1988, she began to go to law school. The FBI began investigating the death threats against Laurie. They put a wiretap on her phone and a hidden camera in the hallway of her apartment building. It turned out that no one had called her when she said she got the death threats. Also, the camera recorded her drawing a swastika on the wall outside of her apartment. Laurie was arrested in December 1988, and she was charged with making false claims to a federal agency. She was looking at a maximum of 5 years in prison and $2,500 in fines. In April 1989, she pleaded guilty to those charges. She was given 5 years of probation. But that was cut short, and she was off probation in September 1992. In 1998, Laurie started a not-for-profit group called Friends of Children's Society. She managed to get a lot of merchandise donated to her. For example, a large play structure was built for Rebecca. Laurie and Rebecca got to go on lots of trips to places like Disney World, and they went on several cruises. But many people said that dealing with Laurie was usually a problem. She seemed relentless when pandering for a donation. She would call repeatedly and was belligerent. Many people just gave her what she wanted so she would move on and they wouldn't have to deal with her anymore. In 2000, Laurie was vice president of the PTA and she oversaw fundraising. During a review of the finances, it was discovered that $800 was missing. Laurie was banned from doing fundraising. This led to a feud between her and the president of the PTA. Laurie would leave threatening messages on her answering machine or tape notes on the front door of her house in the middle of the night. The messages and the notes were odd because they made it look like Laurie was the victim. The president of the PTA managed to get a 2-year restraining order against Laurie. Laurie violated the restraining order nearly immediately, so the police threatened to arrest her. Laurie just decided to pull Rebecca out of the school. But she didn't say it was because of the restraining order. She claimed that one of Rebecca's teachers had sexually abused her. Rebecca then started at a private school for children with dyslexia. In 2004, Laurie met folk singer Peter Yarrow at a concert. Yarrow is best known for being part of the 1960s folk trio Peter, Paul, and Mary. He co-wrote their biggest song, Puff the Magic Dragon. Laurie approached him and asked him for money. He refused, but he did offer to do an annual benefit concert to help pay for part of Rebecca's tuition. He played the show for the next 3 years. Over those 3 years, Yarrow grew close to Rebecca. While many people had problems with Laurie, no one had any problems with Rebecca. She was a bright and friendly girl. She was also very smart and did well in her classes. Rebecca also fiercely loved her mother. When her mother would throw around wild accusations, Rebecca would confirm them. People didn't think that Rebecca was lying. Instead, they think that Laurie convinced her that what she said was true. In spring 2004, Laurie started having problems with the school. She didn't want to pay any more tuition, and she didn't want Rebecca to get homework. The school refused to give them any special treatment. Laurie responded by hanging outside the school and badmouthing it to the other parents. She also sent disturbing emails to the school staff saying that she was so depressed that she could barely take care of Rebecca, and Rebecca didn't deserve that. In September and October 2008, Rebecca called at least 3 people and asked them for money. She said that the state was withholding money for Rebecca and she was having car problems. She also said that Rebecca had a new ailment. Laurie said that she was dangerously constipated. Laurie said that the stool was backed all the way up to her appendix and had crystallized. As a result, she may need an appendectomy. However, there is no medical basis for this ailment. On October 8, 2008, Pierre Yarrow was set to play his annual concert. At this point, the staff was so bothered by Laurie's behavior that they didn't invite her to the thank you luncheon they put on for Yarrow. Laurie found out after the concert that she wasn't invited, and she was furious. Yarrow tried to calm her down and told her that the day was about Rebecca, not her. Laurie ordered Rebecca, who was clearly upset, to get into the car. Laurie said she was going to go home and take a Valium. When she got home, she made several phone calls. She said that the school and Yarrow had betrayed her. She then called the school and left a message saying that she and Rebecca were going on a long vacation. A few days later, on October 11, 2004, an acquaintance of Laurie's became concerned. It was unusual for Laurie to call her 5 times a day to complain and talk about how difficult her life was. But she had not heard from Laurie since October 8th, the day of the concert. The friend knocked at her door, but no one answered. She talked to a neighbor, and the neighbor had a key to the home. He let her inside Laurie and Rebecca's home. In the master bedroom, she found the dead bodies of 54-year-old Laurie Recht and 14-year-old Rebecca Recht. They were both dead on the bed. Laurie was on her back, and Rebecca was on her side, curled toward her mother. The medical examiner determined that they had both died from a drug overdose. It's believed that Laurie kept feeding her daughter pills until she overdosed, and then she overdosed herself. One question was, why did Laurie choose then to kill herself and her daughter? Many people believe it was a very low point in her life and things weren't getting better. She was estranged from her family and she felt betrayed by her community. She may have also suspected that the school was going to call the authorities regarding her ability to parent Rebecca properly. Had Rebecca been taken away from her, she not only would have lost the person she loved most in life, but people may have realized that Rebecca wasn't as sick as Laurie claimed she was. Also, Rebecca was a young teenager, and over the next few years, she may have grown apart from Laurie because it's natural for teenagers to pull away from their parents. Once again, this would have been bad for Laurie because Rebecca may have realized that she wasn't as sick and feeble as her mother made her out to be. After the murder-suicide, the Wilmette Weekly, an alternative newspaper, did an article about the mother and daughter. None of the hospitals would confirm or deny that Rebecca had health problems or if she underwent any medical procedures. But the reporter did show photos of Rebecca as a baby and a child to a pediatrician. He noted that Laurie said that Rebecca had open heart surgery on the 4th day of her life. But Rebecca didn't have a scar on her chest to indicate she had surgery like that. There were photos of Rebecca when she was about 7 months old, playing with blocks and books with both hands. The pediatrician notes that she does not appear to have any mobility issues. He also noted that the walker Rebecca used was generally used by people with spinal problems and not cerebral palsy like Rebecca supposedly had. so it's believed that Laurie had Munchausen by proxy syndrome or factitious disorder imposed on another. She used Rebecca and her supposed ailments for attention and money. Number 1. Beverley Allitt. Grantham and Stephen Hospital is in Grantham, England. On February 21st, 1991, the parents of 7-year-old Liam Taylor brought him to the hospital because he was very ill. After reviewing some x-rays, the doctor determined he had pneumonia and he was admitted to Child's Ward 4. Sometime after he was admitted and resting comfortably, his parents decided to go home and rest for a few hours. When they returned at about 6 p.m., a nurse, 22-year-old Beverley Allitt, told them that Liam's condition had worsened, but he was now stable. So Liam's parents decided not to leave his bedside that night. In the morning, it appeared that Liam's health had improved. Nevertheless, his parents were still worried, so they stayed that day and the next night. Allitt checked on Liam early that morning and then called a colleague over. Liam was a deathly shade of pale. Allitt called for a crash team. But tragically, nothing could be done for 7-week-old Liam Taylor. Due to a lack of oxygen, he suffered brain damage and was placed on life support. The Taylors were told that Liam would never recover, so they made the incredibly hard decision to remove him from life support. He passed away not long afterward. The medical examiner labeled the cause of death as heart failure. Several people in the ward thought it was odd that Liam had been hooked up to an apnea monitor that should have set off alarms if he was breathing, but the machine had remained quiet. The staff just assumed that sometimes accidents happen and they moved on. 2 weeks after Liam's death, on March 25, 1991, 11-year-old Timothy Hardwick was admitted to the hospital. Timothy had cerebral palsy and he was checked into the hospital after an epileptic seizure. Beverley Allitt was assigned to look after him. That day, Timothy had a heart attack. Doctors tried to save the 11-year-old boy's life, but they were unsuccessful. It was thought that the seizures caused his death. On March 3, 1991, Kaylee Desmond was admitted to the children's ward with a chest infection. Allitt was her nurse. A few days after being admitted, Kaylee seemed to be on the road to recovery. But then, on her 5th day, she went into cardiac arrest. Luckily, she was revived. She was then transferred to a different hospital. Doctors at the hospital examined her, and they found something odd. It was a puncture mark under her armpit. They thought it might have been an accidental injection. 12 quiet days passed at Children's Ward 4 at the Grantham Stephen Hospital. On March 20th, 1991, 5-year-old Paul Crampton was brought to the hospital because he had bronchitis. Allitt was assigned to be his nurse. Like the other children, Paul seemed to be getting better after being admitted. But then, over 6 days, he nearly became comatose 3 times. After his 3rd brush with a coma, blood tests were conducted. He had 30 times the insulin in his blood. The doctors were at a loss as to how this could have happened. He was transferred to another hospital. Allitt went with him during the transport. At the new hospital, Paul recovered. 5-year-old Bradley Gibson was admitted to the hospital the same day Paul was transferred. He had been diagnosed with pneumonia. On March 30th, 1991, the 5-year-old boy went into cardiac arrest. His heart stopped beating for 32 minutes. The doctors were about to give up, and then they detected a faint heartbeat. Bradley was finally revived. A blood test was done. for an unknown reason, his insulin level had spiked. Bradley was transferred to a different hospital and he made a recovery. The following day, on March 21st, 2-year-old Ye-Kyung Chan was admitted to the hospital. He had fallen out of a window and fractured his skull. Under Allitt's supervision, his oxygen levels dropped to dangerous levels twice. He was treated both times and recovered. He was moved to a different hospital and had no further problems. March 1991 ended without any abnormal problems in the ward. On April 2, 1991, 2-month-old Becky Phillips was admitted to the hospital because she had a stomach virus. Allitt noted that Becky was showing symptoms of hypoglycemia. According to the Mayo Clinic, hypoglycemia is a condition in which your blood sugar, glucose, level is lower than the standard range. The attending physician examined Becky and he didn't see anything wrong with her, so Becky was discharged. Early the next morning, Becky started screaming and her parents, Peter and Susan, knew something was terribly wrong. They called their GP, who came and checked on Becky. He thought that her heart rate and temperature were normal, so he thought that Becky was possibly colic. Peter and Sue brought Becky into their bed. 2 hours later, she stopped breathing. Becky was rushed to the hospital, but she was tragically pronounced dead on arrival. Becky had a twin sister, Katie. After Becky's death, it was decided that Katie would be placed in the hospital as a precaution. Allitt was tasked with watching the girl. Within 10 minutes, Katie stopped breathing, but she was revived. 2 days later, Katie stopped breathing again. This time, her lungs collapsed. Once again, Katie was revived. She was transferred to another hospital and they examined her. It turned out she had 5 broken ribs. She had also suffered severe brain damage because her brain went without oxygen for a long time. She was left partially paralyzed and partially blind. Despite everything that went wrong, Peter and Sue were grateful for all the help Beverley Allitt seemed to have given to their daughters. They were so grateful, they asked her to be a godmother to Katie. Allitt happily accepted. A few weeks later, on April 22, 1991, 15-month-old Claire Peck's parents admitted her to the hospital after a severe asthma attack. She was placed on a ventilator. Twice she was left alone with Allitt. Both times she went into cardiac arrest. The second time, doctors were unable to revive her. Blood work was done and it was discovered she had double the amount of potassium in her system. At this point, some of the workers in the ward were very suspicious about the number of kids going into cardiac arrest in the past 2 months, so the police were notified. They were told about 25 suspicious cases. Many of them had high levels of insulin or potassium or both. It turned out that there was one common denominator among all of them, Beverley Allitt. Allitt had access to both potassium and insulin. In fact, she had reported that the key to the insulin fridge was missing. The police checked the nursing logs and discovered that some were missing. The police searched Allitt's home and found the missing logs. Allitt denied hurting the children and said she had only been doing her job. Beverley Allitt was charged in November 1991 with 4 counts of murder and 8 counts of attempted murder. Eventually, she was charged with 3 more counts of attempted murder. After she was arrested, investigators looked into her background to see if there was any explanation as to why she would have wanted to hurt the children. Beverley Allitt was born on October 3, 1968 in Lincolnshire Village. As a child, she would fake injuries to attract attention. She would wear bandages and casts, but not allow anyone to examine her wounds. As a teen, Allitt was overweight and spent extra time in the hospitals complaining of different ailments. Doctors would often notice her odd behavior, and when this would happen, she would find another doctor. Her so-called illnesses followed her to Grantham College, where she trained as a nurse. Allitt ended up missing a lot of school because she was allegedly sick. Allitt ultimately failed her nursing examinations, but somehow she obtained a 6-month position as a state-enrolled nurse at the Grantham Kesteven Hospital. At the time, the hospital was severely understaffed with only 2 trained nurses. Several psychiatrists examined Allitt. They concluded she had Munchausen syndrome, meaning she would hurt herself or pretend to be ill for attention, and Munchausen by proxy syndrome, meaning she would hurt and make other people sick for attention. It's apparently rare for one person to have both conditions. Beverley Allitt's trial began on February 15, 1993. It was delayed several times because Allitt was supposedly sick. The prosecutors showed the jury that Allitt was at each incident over the 59 days. When she was off, nothing suspicious happened. Professor Roy Meadow, a pediatrics expert, testified about Munchausen syndrome and Munchausen by proxy syndrome. Meadow noted how Allitt's unusual behavior both as a child and an adult showed she had symptoms of both. Even her trial was postponed because she claimed to be ill. Meadow concluded that Allitt would never be cured and she was dangerous to anyone she was in contact with. The trial lasted nearly 2 months, but Allitt was only there for 16 days. She missed the other trial days because she claimed she was ill. On March 28, 1993, Allitt was convicted of 4 counts of murder, 3 counts of attempted murder, and 6 counts of causing grievous bodily harm. She was given 13 life sentences. Allitt's 59-day crime spree had a terrible effect on the hospital where she worked, Grantham and Kesteven. They were forced to close their maternity ward. The hospital is still open today, but it's called Grantham and District Hospital. Allitt first started serving her sentence in prison at HMP Holloway in London, England. But then, because of her Munchausen syndrome, she was transferred to Rampton Secure Hospital in Nottingham. Allitt is on the list of Home Office offenders who will never be eligible for parole. Allitt has tried to get her sentence reviewed, but that hasn't happened. Several of her victims, who are now adults, believe that she be transferred back to her prison where she should live out the rest of her life. But that has not happened either. At the time of this video, 53-year-old Beverley Allitt is still at the Rampton Secure Hospital. Thank you so much for watching today's video. Please don't forget to check out our new channel, Paranormally Listed. Well, that's all for today. Thanks again for watching.